All right, now this is a video I've been wanting to do for a long time. We're going to talk about the entire reporting that happens at a precious metals dealer. And one thing I'm kind of excited to tell you is that the method that you're used to has actually changed. In fact, it's been dead for about 2 years. The fact is, though, that most of you don't know it. What's even more startling is that most precious metals dealers don't know it either. So I'm talking about things like kilo bars, like 1,000 ounce silver bars, Krugerrands, maples, buffaloes, all the metals that we're all very accustomed to. The fact is that IRS lawyers killed that method of how we used to generate forms about 2 years ago. The good news for you, and it's better than you think, is that it is now much simpler, much easier. But there's one thing you have to pay attention to not get in trouble with the government. And I'm going to talk about that specifically later. Now, everything I'm about to talk about is in our PDF link. It's the first link in the description. Make sure you download it because this has a lot of details that are important to you when you choose to buy or sell precious metals. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. I am a dealer. I'm not your accountant. This is all educational. This is not tax advice. And understand that rules vary by state. So do talk to your CPA before you make any decisions. Now, we do the work at Summit Metals that institutions do for themselves, but we do it in a way that people like you and me can actually use. And I'm going to talk about that a lot today. All right, let's talk about what we have in our first chart, because this is very important. There are really only two boxes. One is a 1099-B and one is a Form 8300. The 1099-B is something that's used for when you sell. And I'm going to talk about specifically when that form gets keyed. The Form 8300 is a form that's used for when you buy, and in particular with cash. And I'm going to talk about that as well. Now, something else that I want to cover, because I think a lot of people have ideas about the government doing all these crazy things as it relates to our transactions in gold and silver. And the fact is, there is no registry of gold owners. No one catalogs how many eagles you own. There are, as I've just described, only two forms, the 1099-B and the 8300. This form is not a fine. It's not something saying you owe money. It's just telling them it's something you did. But here's the good news. You can entirely avoid these forms ever being generated on your behalf, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, if we go back to 1992, that's when the rules changed. The IRS started requiring us to report on these different types of transactions, and it was tied to futures contracts, but it was tied to old futures contracts. Then in 2023, people started questioning that from the industry. The previous was 92-103. That old list ran, though, for about 30 years. But as I mentioned, the contracts underneath it actually changed. Then in late 2023, the industry went back to the IRS, and in March 2024, the IRS lawyers agreed, and the change took place. And I'm going to cover the specifics of that. Those official instructions went out, and we're going to take a look at that as we see in chart 3. Now, if you notice on the chart, you can see that before, gold bars like kilo bars were subject to the form. You can also see things like silver bars of 1,000 ounces, Krugerrands of 25 or more, or maples of 25 or more. I know many of you are well aware of these types of things. Here's the good news. That now is over. There is no reporting for coins. And I want you to know, I actually had a dispute with this with one of my neighbors who got very upset when I told him this, and then he saw a video from someone saying the opposite, and he assumed I was wrong. But I'm telling you I'm right, and this is how we at Summit Metals are reporting it. I even went through the part of speaking with our consultant who puts us through these different programs to make sure we're always in compliance. And he too confirmed that what I'm telling you now is 100% accurate. So this is really exciting news as it relates to coins. They are now not reportable. That means eagles, gold, silver. That means maples. That means Krugerrands. That means ounces of any quantity, not that 25 limit, any quantity. Same thing with junk silver, like big silver bags. Okay, so let's talk real quickly about what in fact is reported. Let's start with gold. If you have a 100-ounce gold bar, that is reported via these forms. Or if you sell at the same time 3 kilos of gold, because remember a kilo is 32 ounces. So that becomes a reportable event. What's not reported? You selling a single kilo bar. That's under the line. Now with silver, a typical silver futures contract of the larger size is 5,000 ounces. So if you're to come in and sell a 1,000-ounce bar, guess what? That's not reportable. However, if you sell 5 of the 100-ounce bars, adds up to 5,000, that becomes a reportable event. For platinum, that number is 50 ounces, and for palladium, it's 100 ounces. Now, these are typically sales that occur within a 24 period, an aggregate of those sales. But here's the point that you have to pay attention to, and this is very important. You cannot split your sales to avoid hitting those numbers. That's the kind of things that we're required to pay attention to as our all precious metals dealer, often referred to as structuring. So that's where the government can become very engaged. And what they're ultimately doing is they're looking to see what was your intent. In other words, was your intent to stay under the numbers so that you didn't generate a form when in fact you were selling those much, much larger amounts. So the specs have changed, the lists have changed, and you're hearing it first, if you haven't heard it, I guess, somewhere else. But this is what's really important. Now, I know a lot of you are very smart and you realize that the CME has come out with a 1-ounce gold futures contract. Here's the difference. That's not physically settled. That's cash settled. So that, guess what, does not apply. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. So if you're to sell your 1-ounce Eagle, Buffalo, Maple, that has no effect on us generating a form. And that's what's really important. Let's talk about the buy side of a transaction, because this too is also very significant. When we think about currency, we know that when you go to the bank, they're very focused on anything over $10,000. So think about this. If I write a check and it's for $20,000, guess what? That's not a reportable event. Why? Because it's already in the banking system. Same thing with a wire. Same thing with a credit card. No report, any amount. However, if you do cash over $10,000, that will generate a Form 8300, and we have to file it within 15 days, and you'll get a letter every year by January 31 saying that we did it. Again, this is not a form. It's not something saying you owe this amount of money. It's simply something that we have to file and notify you then that we made the filing. Very, very few customers pay cash over those numbers because most simply do it via a check or a wire, and that is a very common practice that happens in every precious metals dealer. What counts, though, again, is cash. That's what you have to pay attention to. And don't think you can come in and buy 9,000 today, 9,000 tomorrow, then on and on and on. That will be viewed as structuring. They will see it as intent. Now, where it might be a little bit different is if, for example, if you can show you've been dollar cost averaging daily or weekly or something to that effect, where it's a systematic purchase that you're consistent with, in my opinion, that would not generate any form of a form. So when we talk about currency, obviously money orders 10,000 or less does equal cash. And a cashier's check of 10,000 or less equals cash. A $12,000 cashier's check is not cash. Why? Again, because that is something that has already been through a bank and recognized as being over $10,000. That would generate no form. However, if you came in with two $6,000 money orders, that equals cash, that would generate a form because both were under that $10,000 number. Checks never, wires never, cards never. The tripwire is what you very much need to be focused on. If you want to look at it, the structuring rules, it's 31 USC 5324, referred to as multi-day buying. That can be legal, but you have to make sure you're doing it with the correct intent. You can't split to and dodge a report. That intent is what ultimately they're looking to see. So be smart. Don't do those kind of things. You never need to. And this is so much better than what it used to be for all of us. You can very easily buy and sell at your leisure without generating forms, without the government becoming involved in what you're doing, and do it the right way. That's the bottom line. You know, I know, everyone knows. You know, there's that constant thing where someone will come in and, kind of lean over the counter, hey, what do I need to do so I don't generate a form? Well, that's the answer I'm giving you right now, so you don't need to worry about that. So this is great news. We know a lot of this came as a result of the Patriot Act, and we as dealers are also required to follow anti-money laundering programs to make sure that we're in compliance. So firms like ours, we have a compliance officer. We all have to go through annual training. We have audits. We have every one of these procedures in place, and it's exceedingly rare that we ever have to file any of these forms. So stick to normal activity. Nothing's filed. As you know, though, be aware that when you do transact through a bank and you do go over $10,000, that can generate a report. And one of the reports that banks can generate that you should also be aware of is called a SAR, and that's a special report that is, I think, more significant. So a coin shop or a dealer has less surveillance, for example, than a bank, and that's what you would expect, and that's normal. Now, nothing I'm saying is to say to you that when you sell something that you don't incur a tax liability, because you do. And in fact, we know that our metals are treated as collectibles and actually are taxed at a slightly higher rate than if you were to long-term hold, for example, a stock or a bond or something like that and sell it. So be aware that yes, there are taxes, but that's ultimately between you and the government. That has nothing to do with us as a precious metals dealer. I would advise you as you participate in your precious metals journey to keep receipts, keep records, photos of the types of metals you have, those kind of things. Someday when you do sell something, you don't want them to use a zero cost basis. You want to show you actually paid something for it. So if you're audited, you can say the difference is actually only this amount, not some much larger amount. Now in closing, just to summarize, coins are off the list, and that is fantastic news for us. Purchases are not tracked. Cash, when used in that 10,000 or higher, that becomes a reportable event. Keep your receipts. Most of everything you do is entirely private, and that hasn't changed. I want to thank you for tuning in. Remember, we've got a PDF that's got all these rules and things in it, so you can, take a look at that and know exactly where you stand before you choose to act. And I think that's very important. Now, let me remind you again, we're a precious metals dealer. We're not giving you legal or tax advice. Make sure you seek the proper authority for that type of information. I'm Eric with Summit Metals. I've enjoyed providing this video today because I think it's such good news for all of us, and happy stacking.